Hi guys, welcome back. So today I am here to talk to you about my 5 favorite books of 2017. And just to let you know, these are my favorite books that I read in 2017 that have been published in 2017 or prior. Okay, so this does not include ARCs of 2018 releases. Those were not in here. This was just things on my Goodreads that I read in 2017 that are already published. So this was kind of an interesting one. Looking over what I've read in the last year, I think so far, I still think I'll read a few more, but nothing that I'm expecting to top this list. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this now because pretty satisfied with where I landed on it. And I so far have read, I think, 66 books this year, which is pretty good, less than last year, but I had a baby, so I am very happy with that. And I've got to say, my top books of the year are very diverse. Very diverse for the most part. Except for one of my favorite books of the year is a controversial book, which is kind of interesting. So we'll get into that. I think what I'm also going to do in this video is talk to you for each book a little bit about how and why it is or isn't diverse. And I think, as you'll see, we've got a lot of diversity here. There are definitely some themes that you'll see running through this. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. When I was looking back over it, it actually wasn't that hard. It was kind of interesting figuring out, okay, like what were my favorite books of the things I've read? And I've read a lot of great books. There were other books that were definitely contenders for these spots that I really loved, but that just didn't quite edge into my top 5. So, without further ado, these are not in order. I don't think I can order them. I love all of them, and I just don't want to do that to myself, so they're in no particular order, but these are my top 5 books that I read in 2017. First up is one that I recently told you was going to be on this list, and this is one I most recently read. That is Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie C. Dow. If you have not seen my review of this book, I will link it up above. Definitely go check it out. This is a debut novel. It is a retelling of Snow White, but it features the backstory of the evil queen set in ancient China. It's amazing. I could gush about it. Really all of these books I loved so much, so, it could easily be a really gushy video, but I highly recommend it. This was definitely a favorite of mine. I'm really looking forward to reading the sequel. So in terms of diversity, it's interesting. Julie is a Vietnamese American, so she is a minority author. That, I think, is a really important factor. Also, the fact that this book is set in a non-Western culture makes it diverse. So, on both counts, you get quite a bit of diversity with this novel, but also it's just so fun, so well written. Shifeng, the protagonist in this, the kind of evil queen character, is now one of my new favorite villains, along with Queen Lavanna from Marissa Meyer's Lunar Chronicles and others that I've talked about before. So, first of my top 5 books of the year is definitely Forest of a Thousand Lanterns. The next book on this list is actually one of the first books that I read this year and is by far the most controversial book on this list. But I still love it, and I am unashamed. It is Carve by Veronica Roth. This book is kind of a hybrid sci-fi fantasy. I thought it was beautifully written. I thought the characters were really interesting and relatable. I was super into the world that she was creating, and I'm really excited to read the sequel. I loved this. This really was one of my favorite books of the year. I also actually got to go to the launch party for this book, which was really cool, back in January. I had a newborn baby, and I was so excited to get out of the house, but that was really neat, and so I actually got it signed. That was exciting. But you guys, I loved this book. I thought it was really good, and it's one of my favorites of the books that I've read this year. I thought it was really well written. I thought it had really good world building and really interesting characters. I thought this far exceeded her writing in the Divergent series. I enjoyed those, but I loved this. I thought it was just fantastic. There has been controversy. If you're interested in hearing more about that, I will link Francina Simone's discussion video. Feel free to check that out, but this is one of my top 5 books of the year. All right, next, number 3 on this list is another one that I have done a very gushy review about, and I will link it up above. haven't seen it yet, but that is Warcross by Marie Lu. You guys, this book was so much fun. I just loved it. I love Marie Lu as a writer generally. I like everything that she's written. Warcross was just so good. It was just probably one of the most fun books I've read this year, especially as a gamer. It's about virtual reality. It's an incredibly diverse book in terms of characters, also in terms of the author, who is herself Asian American. I loved it. I'm a huge fan. I know some people had issues with it and maybe it wasn't perfect, but you know what? I really didn't care because I enjoyed it so much. I had so much fun reading it, and there were so many things that were done so well about it. The settings were so vivid. Her writing, I loved this book. It definitely made my top 5. So as I'm doing this, you guys, I'm realizing all of my 5 favorite books this year have been young adult. And to be fair, I read predominantly young adult, but I do read other things. But at least for this year, my favorite books have like my favorite books are all YA, and they're all really good. The next book that I have on this list is a sequel. It is Shadowhouse Fall by Daniel Jose Older, and I think this is one of the most underrated series. It's so good, and I don't know why people aren't talking about it more because it's amazing. Shadowhouse Fall is the sequel to Shadow Shaper. It is an urban fantasy series set in Brooklyn, and the main character is a young woman of color who finds out that she has these magical abilities that are sort of rooted in this community magic having to do with murals that people make for the dead, and it's a really interesting, complex world. It's so beautifully written. There's just so much in these books. I mean, the world is so good, the magic system is so unique and interesting, and he just dives into some really serious issues dealing with things like racism and class, and in this book, police brutality and resistance, and it's just done so well. Seriously, I don't know why more people aren't talking about this. I think Daniel Jose Older is one of the most underrated authors. Like, he's so good. I actually had the opportunity to do an interview with him, which I will link up above. It's probably not my best performance in an interview because I was like kind of sick, but the things that he had to say were so good. It's definitely worth checking out. So I'll link it up above because actually a lot of people haven't even watched that interview, but he's great. If you haven't read the series, really go check it out. It's absolutely worth reading. And my final favorite book of this year is one that I actually do not own, although I probably should at some point, but it's one that is getting a ton of attention. You'll hear about it all over BookTube. I think it absolutely deserves all of the accolades that it's getting, and I'll put a picture right here. It is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. You guys, if you have not read this book, please, please, please go out and read it. Even if you're not into YA, go out and read this book. It's so good. It's about a 16-year-old girl named Star who sees her best friend get shot by the police and is killed. And it's about her dealing with the fallout of that situation. It's also about her grappling with her issues of identity and race and culture. She is going to a predominantly white private school. She has a white boyfriend. She is dealing with a lot of identity issues. And then, yeah, this book is amazing. It's so well done. It's so well written. It was Angie Thomas's debut novel. I mean, man, she like knocked this one out of the park. If you haven't read it, go read it. She absolutely deserves everything. It's being made into a film, which I'm really excited about. I'm totally dragging my husband to see it. I know I can't get him to read the book, but he is so going to see that film because I'm really excited to see what they do with it. The book was amazing. All right, so let's do an overall wrap up because it's kind of interesting to me what I ended up being drawn to this year. So let's talk about this. Okay, so in terms of authors and representation, I think this is kind of interesting. I have on my top 5 books in the year, and like this was not planned, this is literally just the books that I loved. I've got 2 books written by female Asian authors. I have 1 book written by a female African American author. I have a book written by a male Latino author. And I have one book written by a white woman, which is kind of more typical. But even within this, I think she gets into some interesting diversity issues, although some people didn't necessarily love the way she did it. She does. So, reflecting back on the year that I've had in reading, I've read a lot of different things. I've read some underrepresented authors that were amazing. I've read some that were not so great. I've read some overrepresented types of authors that were amazing and some that were not so great. But I think what this kind of shows, if you're looking at kind of the best of the best, at least for me, there is a serious insurgence happening within at least young adult fiction, where I think we are seeing a lot more authors of color and underrepresented authors and stories about underrepresented groups of people and cultures beginning to really make more of an appearance, which I just want to say I think is amazing. I am so happy to see that there's more representation for teenagers and young adults who are reading these books. I think it's needed. It's been needed for a really long time. And it's interesting for me too, because I'm raising biracial children, and so I'm always kind of on the lookout too for finding books where they can see themselves represented in even children's literature and eventually in young adult. They're not there yet, they're too young, but with my 3-year-old, for example, we have books that talk about being mixed and have more representation of various cultures, and that's something that I think is really important and maybe something I'm more aware of being a mother to multiracial children. So anyway, it's an interesting issue and one that I care a lot about. Let me know in the comments down below if you guys have any thoughts on this, what your favorite books that you read this year were, if you've read any of these, what you think about them, if you haven't. These were definitely my favorite books that I read this year, and I read a lot of great books, but yeah, you may disagree. I have no problem with that. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments, whatever, but these were my top books. So yeah, I'm interested to hear what everybody has to say about it, because this was, maybe unexpected. Be interesting. If you guys liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.